When you look back at the history of human innovation, it's really a story about imitation, isn't it?
In a lot of ways, yes. We look at the world around us and try to copy it.
Exactly. We saw the eye, and we spent centuries trying to build the camera. We saw the bird, and eventually we engineered the airplane.
The lever, the crank, they're all just better versions of the human arm. They amplify what we can already do physically.
But this multi-decade quest for artificial intelligence feels different. It feels like it's on a completely different level.
Oh, it's a whole different ballgame. It's infinitely more ambitious because the goal isn't to imitate a physical part. Not the eye, not the arm.
It's the mind itself.
It's the mind. The goal is to imitate the very process of thought. And that's a monumental task.
So for this, that's where we really need to go. We have to get past the slick chatbots and the amazing images we're all seeing online.
We have to. As impressive as all that is, it's just the surface. The real story, the real revolution is happening underneath.
In the mathematical engine room. I like that phrasing.
That's what it is. It's the place where these messy, kind of abstract qualities of human thinking, intuition, creativity, understanding get translated.
Translated into what?
Into the cold, hard, deterministic language of calculus and linear algebra. Into math.
So that's our mission today. We're going to try and build a real foundational understanding of how that synthetic mind is actually constructed.
Right. We'll start with the philosophy, this kind of 70-year civil war that really defined the entire field.
And then we're going to get technical. We're going to put the artificial neuron on the operating table and dissect it piece by piece.
The weights, the biases, all the mathematical guts that allow a machine to actually learn something.
And from there, we'll build back up to the modern era. We'll look at the massive architectures like the transformer and then push right to the edge, to the frontier.
To the point where these machines aren't just talking anymore. They're starting to act. They're becoming autonomous agents in the world.
The big takeaway for you, listening to this, is that intelligence, at least as we're building it, isn't magic. It's math.
Sophisticated, complex, mind-bogglingly scaled math. But math, nonetheless. And the future seems to be defined by two key ideas. First, this fusion of old and new ideas called Neurosymbolic AI. And second, this almost physical drive for a machine to learn through experience, to minimize its own surprise about the world, a framework called active inference.
All right, let's start at the beginning then, with those philosophical roots.
The Great Divide.
So let's really focus in on what makes AI so unique, because as we said, it's not just another invention, it's not the wheel, it's not the printing press.
No, those solved problems of, say, motion or information storage, very concrete physical problems. AI is trying to solve the problem of understanding itself.
Which means you have to take something that feels very human and subjective, like an idea or an intuition, and make it mathematical.
You have to make it rigid, replicable. You have to translate that messy biological process into a function that a computer can execute.
And this is a core concept we have to accept, right? That within a machine, what we call intelligence, is just the final output of a bunch of very complex equations.
It's a deterministic result.
Yeah.
And that can be unsettling. There's this huge gap between the warmth of a human thought and the cold calculation of a derivative in calculus. The entire field of AI is trying to bridge that exact gap.
And that attempt, that 70-year journey, was not a smooth, straight line. You called it a civil war.
It absolutely was. A fierce intellectual battle that shaped everything. It dictated who got funding, which ideas were pursued, and it's why we had these long periods called AI winters.
Where progress just stalled.
Completely. The hype would get ahead of the reality, the funding would disappear, and the field would go dormant for a decade. And this happened because the field was split into two camps with two radically different answers to one question.
Which was?
How do you represent knowledge inside a machine? Is intelligence built on rules, or is it built on experience?
Okay, so let's break those two sides down. Who was on the first side?
On one side, you had the Symbolists. Their whole philosophy was based on rationalism.
Meaning they believed intelligence was like logic, like a math proof.
Precisely. They believed that all of intelligence was just the manipulation of high-level symbols according to rules. Their core belief was if you, a human, could just write down all the rules of the world, you could build a perfect reasoning machine.
So, a giant, perfect encyclopedia.
The perfect rule book. And on the other side, you had the complete opposite. You had the Connectionists.
And they were the empiricists.
Exactly. They rejected the whole idea of pre-programmed rules. They argued that intelligence isn't programmed, it emerges. It's learned from statistical patterns by creating a system that mimics the interconnected networks of the biological brain.
So learning from experience, not from a rule book.
That's the core distinction. And the reason this history is so important right now is that we're finally at a point where the war is over. The two sides are fusing together.
And that's what you called neurosymbolic.
That's the modern frontier. The most powerful AI systems today are the ones that combine the logical rigor of the symbolists with the intuitive, pattern-matching flexibility of the connectionists. It's the synthesis.
Okay, so to really understand that synthesis, we need to understand the parts. Let's go deep on that first paradigm, symbolic AI.
Right. Or as it's often called, GOFAI, good old-fashioned AI.
Good old-fashioned AI, I like that. So its core idea is pure rationalism. Intelligence is just moving symbols around based on instructions.
It is. And to really get your head around it, the best way is to use the analogy of a library, a very specific kind of library.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
Imagine a grand, infinite library. It's perfectly organized, perfectly cataloged. This library represents the AI's entire knowledge of the world.
Every fact is a book on a shelf.
Every single fact. But here's the critical part.
Yeah.
Every single book in this library contains one and only one type of instruction. A strict, non-negotiable if-then rule.
Okay, so give me an example.
A simple one might be a book labeled dog identification. And inside, the rule says, if an entity has fur and if it barks, then it is categorized as a dog. That's rule A.
Simple enough.
Then you have another book, rule B, that says, if an entity is a dog, and E, if it is wagging its tail, then it is likely happy. And the final rule, rule C, that says, if an entity is happy, then it is safe to approach.
So it's a chain of logic.
A perfect chain. The symbolic AI system is the librarian. When you give it a new piece of information like, I see a barking thing with fur that's wagging its tail, it doesn't guess. It doesn't use intuition.
It goes to the card catalog.
It executes its inference engine. It goes and pulls rule A, confirms it's a dog, then it pulls rule B, confirms it's happy, then it pulls rule C, and concludes with absolute certainty that it's safe. There's no probability involved. It's pure deduction.
And this kind of system, this expert system, it actually worked for some things, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was fantastic in very structured, controlled environments, things where the rules are clear and finite. Think about complex logistics for the military, or tax preparation software.
Or early chess programs.
Exactly. The rules of chess are complicated, but they are known and they are absolute. This piece moves this way, that's it. That's a perfect environment for a symbolic system.
And one of its big selling points, I imagine, is that you can always tell why it made a decision.
That's its greatest strength.
Yeah.
It has perfect explainability. If the system makes a mistake, if it concludes something wrong, you can trace the logic back step by step and find the exact if-then rule that failed.
So it's completely transparent.
Completely. And this maps perfectly to the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman on human thinking. He talks about System 1 and System 2.
Right. System 1 is fast and intuitive, and System 2 is slow and deliberate.
And symbolic AI is System 2. It's slow, careful, explicit, logical. It's the conscious, calculating part of your mind that does your taxes or plans a trip.
But of course, there's a but coming, a fatal flaw.
A massive one. The flaw is brittleness. These systems are incredibly fragile.
Why?
Because of something called the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. The AI only knows what a human has explicitly programmed into it. It has zero capacity to handle the messiness and ambiguity of the real world.
So let's go back to the dog example. How does it break?
Well, what if you see a dog that's sick? It's a hairless breed, maybe it has mange, and it has a cough instead of a bark.
So it violates rule A, it doesn't have fur and it doesn't bark.
Right, and for the symbolic system, the logic just shatters. It fails catastrophically. It can't generalize. It has no concept of common sense or close enough. It only knows the exact rules it was given.
And the real world is never that clean.
Never. The real world is full of hairless, coughing dogs. And that's why this approach, for all its logical purity, ultimately hit a wall and led to those AI winters. It just couldn't cope.
Which naturally leads us to the other side, the rebellion.
The Connectionist paradigm. This is a direct ancestor of the deep learning that powers everything we see today. And it's based on a completely opposite philosophy.
Empiricism, learning from data, not rules.
Exactly. The core idea here is that intelligence isn't programmed, it's not structured, it's learned. It emerges from the statistical experience of processing massive amounts of information.
And the inspiration here wasn't logic, it was biology.
It was the brain. The idea was to create vast networks of simple processing units, these artificial neurons, and have them learn by strengthening or weakening the connections between them based on what they're shown.
So instead of the library analogy, what's the right way to think about this?
The best analogy is a child learning. Think about how a toddler learns what a dog is. You don't give them a rule book.
Right, you don't say if it has 4 legs and a tail and fur.
Of course not. You just point. You point at a poodle, a Great Dane, a cartoon dog on TV, a picture in a book, and you just say the word dog.
And over time, the child's brain just figures it out.
It figures it out. Without ever writing down a single explicit rule, the brain starts to pick up on the deep statistical regularities. The texture of fur, the shape of a snout, the sound of a bark.
The child can't explain the rules they're using, but they can spot a dog instantly.
That is the connectionist principle in a nutshell. A neural network starts as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. All its internal connections, its weights, are just set to random numbers. It's completely stupid.
And then you just show it data.
You show it astronomical amounts of data. Millions of pictures of dogs, all correctly labeled. And with every picture, the network makes a guess. At first, the guesses are random and terrible.
And it gets told it's wrong.
Yes, and every time it's wrong, it makes tiny, tiny adjustments to its internal wiring. It's in this relentless process of trying to minimize its own error. Over millions of examples, it slowly refines itself until it becomes an expert dog spotter.
So this gives it a flexibility that the symbolic system could never have.
Tremendous flexibility. A connectionist system can handle the messy, real world. It can see a dog that's partly hidden behind a tree or drawn as a weird cartoon or
A hairless coughing dog?
even the hairless coughing dog, because it's not working off a rigid checklist. It's working off a fuzzy statistical resemblance. It says, this pattern is 98% similar to the millions of dog patterns I've seen before.
And this is Kahneman System 1.
Absolutely. It's fast, it's reflexive, it's intuitive, it feels like magic. This is the engine behind modern image recognition, natural language processing, all of it.
But again, there has to be a cost to this flexibility, a downside.
A very significant one. These models are famously profoundly opaque. They are functional black boxes.
What does that mean in practice?
It means a deep neural network can look at a medical scan and say, with 95% certainty, that's a malignant tumor. And it might be right. But if the doctor asks why,
It can't answer.
it can't. It can't point to a rule. Its decision is the result of millions of tiny calculations across its entire network. It can give you a probability, but it can't give you a logical proof. And in high-stakes situations, that's a huge problem.
And there are other issues, right? They need a ton of data and power.
They are computationally gluttonous. They need mountains of data and supercomputers to train. And maybe most dangerously, they are structurally prone to hallucination.
Which is the big buzzword right now. What is it, fundamentally?
It's when the model confidently states something that is completely false. It does this because, based on all the statistical patterns it has learned from the internet, the lie just sounds better. It's more fluent, more plausible sounding than the complicated truth. It's prioritizing style over substance.
So after decades of this back and forth, it sounds like the big realization is that you need both.
That's the defining insight of the 2020s. Neither system is sufficient on its own. Pure symbolism is too brittle. Pure connectionism is too unreliable. You have to fuse them.
Which brings us back to neurosymbolic AI. The goal is to build a hybrid.
To build a system that has the fast, intuitive perception of a neural network, the System 1, but also has the slow, logical, verifiable reasoning of a symbolic system, the System 2.
A machine that can both see the world and think about it.
Exactly. And we're already seeing incredible examples of this working at the cutting edge.
You mentioned an example from Google DeepMind.
Yes, AlphaGeometry, which came out in early 2024. And geometry is the perfect test case for this, because solving a hard geometry problem requires two totally different skills.
Okay, what are they?
First, you need that flash of insight, that intuition. Where do I draw an extra line on this diagram to unlock the solution? That's a creative System 1 leap.
But that's not enough. You can't just say, I have a hunch.
No, you then need the second part. Rigorous, step-by-step proof. You have to prove logically that your creative leap leads to the correct answer. And that's pure System 2 deduction.
And one system alone can't do both well.
A pure neural network can give you the creative hunch, but it can't generate the formal proof. And a pure symbolic engine could generate the proof, but it would waste billions of years searching randomly for the right creative first step.
So how did AlphaGeometry combine them?
It was an elegant two-part system. It used a large neural model to suggest the creative, intuitive steps, the what if we draw a line here part.
So it provided the system one spark.
And then it immediately handed that suggestion over to a powerful symbolic engine. The symbolic part then tried to rigorously prove, using formal logic, if that suggestion was valid.
The system two fact checker.
Precisely. And this hybrid approach, this back and forth between intuition and logic, allowed it to solve geometry problems at the level of the International Mathematical Olympiad, a feat that was totally impossible for either approach on its own.
That's incredible. So this successful fusion really forces us to look deeper then, to look inside the engine at the actual parts.
We have to. What are the atoms that make up these systems? What is the actual math that allows a pile of random numbers to learn what a dog is, or how to solve an Olympiad problem?
Okay, let's zoom in then. Let's do the atomic anatomy of learning.
We'll start with the single fundamental unit, the artificial neuron.
Also called a perceptron, right? This is the building block for everything.
It's the atom from which all this complexity is built. And while it's, loosely inspired by the neurons in our brains, it's really much simpler to think of it as just a mathematical function.
A gatekeeper.
A sophisticated numerical gatekeeper. Its entire job is to weigh evidence and then make a decision based on that evidence.
And this whole process can be boiled down to a single equation, conceptually.
It can. If you strip away all the notation, it's a four-step process. Sum up the incoming evidence, multiply that evidence by its importance, add a baseline value, and then decide whether to pass a signal on.
Okay, let's deconstruct that piece by piece. We'll use a running example to make it concrete. How about an AI that's trying to predict the price of a house?
Perfect. That's a classic example.
So what's the first component in that calculation?
The first component is the inputs. Usually call them 6-allers. These are just the raw data points you're feeding the neuron.
In our example, this would be things like the number of bedrooms.
Exactly. 6SU could be the number of bedrooms, 6A2NU could be the square footage, 63.3 could be the local crime rate. They're just the numbers that describe the house.
Okay, so you have the inputs. What's next? This is where the learning happens, right?
This is the absolute core of it. The next component is the weight, or dollars. And this is probably the single most important concept in all of AI.
The weight determines the importance of each input.
Precisely. It's a multiplier that tells the neuron how much influence a specific input should have on the final decision.
You use the analogy of a sound mixing board.
It's the best way to think about it. The inputs, bedrooms, square footage, are the different instruments in the band. The weights are the volume sliders for each instrument.
So if the AI learns that square footage is the most important factor in a house's price,
then the weight for square footage, $2s, will be turned way up. It'll be a high number. A small change in square footage will cause a big change in the final price prediction.
and if something is less important, like, I don't know, the color of the front door,
the weight for that input will be turned way down, close to zero. The AI learns to ignore it.
and these weights can also be negative, right?
Critically, yes. Take the crime rate input, 6 3-hour lever. The AI will learn that a high crime rate lowers the price. So the weight for crime rate, $3, will become a large negative number. The higher the crime rate, the more it subtracts from the final price.
So, and this is the key point, learning is just the process of adjusting these weights.
That is it. That is all it is. When we say we're training a model like GPT-4, we are just spending months with supercomputers fiddling with trillions of these little volume knobs until the final output of the whole orchestra sounds right.
And the scale is just staggering. For our house model, we have maybe 3 or 4 weights. For GPT-4,
The estimate is around 1.8 trillion weights. 1.8 trillion of these knobs all being adjusted simultaneously. That's the scale of the optimization problem.
okay, so we have inputs multiplied by their weights. What's the third piece? The bias.
The bias, or ball dollars. This is just an extra number that gets added to the total sum, and importantly, it's independent of the inputs.
What's its purpose? Why do you need it?
Its purpose is to give the neuron a baseline, or a starting point. Think about the house price example again. What if a house has 0 bedrooms and 0 square footage? It's just an empty plot of land.
If you just multiplied the inputs by the weights, the price would be 0.
Which is wrong. An empty plot of land still has value. The bias allows the model to represent that.
Yeah.
The bias, ball dollars, could be set to, say, $50,000. That's the starting price before you even consider any of the house's features.
So the bias is like the neuron's predisposition.
That's a great way to put it. It's the neuron's personality. A neuron with a high negative bias is a skeptic. It takes a lot of positive input to get it to fire. A neuron with a high positive bias is an optimist. It's eager to fire. It's a small but mathematically essential component.
Okay, so we've summed the weighted inputs and added the bias. We have a raw number. We're not done yet, are we?
Not yet. This next step is absolutely crucial. If we just pass that raw number to the next layer of neurons, the whole network, no matter how deep it was, would mathematically collapse.
Collapse into what?
Into a simple, boring, linear regression model. A straight line.
And a straight line can't model complex things.
It can't model the real world. The shape of a face isn't a straight line. The grammar of a sentence isn't a straight line. The world is nonlinear. So we need to introduce nonlinearity into the system.
And that's the job of the activation function.
That is its sole critical purpose. It takes that raw score and runs it through one final function before passing it on. It's the final decision maker. It decides if the signal is strong enough to matter.
And there are a few different types that are common.
A few key workhorses. Historically, the sigmoid function was very important. It takes any number, positive or negative, and squashes it into a value between 0 and 1.
Which is perfect for representing a probability.
Exactly. But it has some mathematical problems that make it slow to train in very deep networks. So the modern standard is a function called ReLU.
The rectified linear unit.
Sounds complicated, but its rule is incredibly simple. If the input number is negative, the output is 0. If it's positive, the output is just the number itself. That's it.
And that simplicity makes it fast.
Incredibly fast. And it has another nice property. It creates sparse networks where a lot of neurons are outputting 0 at any given time. This is actually a bit like the brain, which conserves energy by only having a small fraction of neurons firing at once.
And there's one more, right? Softmax?
Right. Softmax is usually used only on the very last layer of a model that's trying to classify something. Its job is to take all the final scores and turn them into a nice, clean probability distribution that adds up to 100%.
So it's the function that would say 85% chance this is a dog, 10% chance it's a cat, 5% chance it's a bird.
That is precisely what softmax does. It gives you the final, confident answer.
Okay, so we've built the neuron, we have the inputs, the weights, the bias, the activation function, we have the complete atom.
We have the engine parts.
But at the start, as you said, this engine is just a pile of randomly assembled parts. It's stupid. The weights are all wrong. Our house price model would give insane answers.
Completely useless answers. So now we get to the really interesting part. The process of making it smart. The process of training.
And this all relies on a cycle, a loop, driven by 3 mathematical pillars.
3 pillars that are all powered by calculus. This is where the machine actually studies.
The first pillar has to be some way of telling the machine how wrong it is.
Exactly. You need a scorecard. And that's the first pillar, the loss function. You can think of it as the mathematical conscience of the AI.
Its only job is to measure the gap between the AI's guess and the right answer.
The ground truth, as we call it. The loss function calculates a single number that represents the size of the error.
I like the analogy of throwing a ball at a bucket.
It works perfectly. Your first rando throw, you're 5 meters away, your loss is 5. You adjust, you throw again. Now you're 1 meter away, your loss is 1.
And the AI's entire goal during training is just to get that loss number as close to 0 as possible.
That's its entire reason for being. It doesn't care about houses or buckets. It only cares about minimizing that loss score.
And there's a specific function that's often used, right? It means squared error.
Yes, MSE is very common. The math is simple.
Yeah.
You take the difference between the prediction and the true value, and then you square that difference.
Why square it? What does that do?
2 very important things. First, it makes all errors positive, so a guess that's too high and a guess that's too low are both penalized. They don't cancel each other out.
And the second reason?
This is the more important one. It penalizes big errors much, much more heavily than small errors. If you're off by 2, the penalty is 4. But if you're off by 10, the penalty is 100.
So it forces the model to fix its most gigantic, embarrassing mistakes first?
Exactly. It creates a very strong signal at the beginning of training that pushes the model away from its initial random state and towards something vaguely reasonable very quickly.
Okay, so the loss function gives the AI its report card. It says, you got an F, you're 5 meters off, now what? The AI knows it's wrong, but how does it know how to get better?
This is the billion-dollar question, or, in the case of GPT-4, the trillion-parameter question. How do you know which of those 1.8 trillion knobs to turn and in which direction?
You need a compass.
We need a perfect mathematical compass. And that compass is the second pillar, the algorithm called gradient descent.
Okay, this is a big one. Let's use the analogy of the hiker to really unpack this slowly.
It's the best way to visualize it. So, Imagine you are a hiker. You're standing on a vast rolling mountain range at night. There's no moon, no stars, and a thick fog all around you. You are completely blind.
And my goal is to get to the lowest point in the entire mountain range, the bottom of the deepest valley.
That's your only goal. That lowest point represents the lowest possible error, the global minimum of your loss function. The mountain itself is just a visualization of the loss score for every possible combination of your trillion weights.
So since I can't see, I have to rely on my other senses.
You have to rely on touch. You put your foot out and you feel the ground right where you're standing. You can feel the slope. You can feel that the ground goes steeply downhill to your left and maybe slightly uphill in front of you.
That feeling, that slope beneath my feet, that's the gradient.
That is the gradient. Mathematically, it's a vector of partial derivatives, but conceptually, it's just the slope. It tells you two things: the exact direction of steepest descent, the way downhill, and how steep that path is.
It's the perfect compass for a blind hiker.
It is. So what do? You take one step in that downhill direction.
And the size of that step is really important.
It is critically important. It's a parameter called the learning rate. If your step is too big, if your learning rate is too high, you might just leap clear over the valley bottom and end up halfway up the other side, making your error even worse.
And if it's too small?
You'll take tiny, microscopic baby steps. You'll eventually get to the bottom, but it might take you a million years. So choosing the right learning rate is a crucial balancing act between speed and stability.
And the AI just repeats this process. Feel the slope, take a step. Feel the slope, take a step.
Millions of times. Each step is an iteration. It keeps doing this until the ground flattens out and the gradient is zero. At that point, it has arrived at the bottom of a valley. It has found a minimum.
But you said a minimum, not the minimum.
Right. Sometimes the hiker can get stuck in a little shallow dip, a local minimum that isn't the true deepest valley. Modern optimizers have clever tricks to deal with this. They use things like momentum, which is like the hiker having a bit of speed, allowing them to roll over the small hills to find the real global minimum.
Okay, this is making sense. So the loss function is the score, gradient descent is the compass that points the way to a better score. But there's a piece missing.
A huge piece.
The error is calculated at the very end of the network. But the mistake, the weight that's wrong, could be right at the beginning, hundreds of layers deep. How do you assign the blame correctly across that whole chain?
This is the problem of attribution. And it's solved by the third pillar, arguably the most ingenious part of the whole process, an algorithm called backpropagation.
Which is basically a blame game.
A highly structured mathematical blame game.
Oh.
And the best way to understand it is to use the analogy of a car factory assembly line.
Okay, let's walk through it.
So the car is built by moving through station A, then station B, then station C. That process of building the car is the forward pass in the neural network. It's the process of making a prediction.
And at the very end of the line, there's an inspector who finds a flaw. The paint is the wrong color.
That's the error. That's the loss function. Now, the inspector needs to find out whose fault it is. So he begins the backward pass. He walks backwards up the assembly line.
He starts at the last station, station C, the paint station.
Right. He asks the painter, "Did you use the wrong paint?" The painter might say, "No, I used the paint I was given, but the primer from station B was a weird color, which affected my final coat."
So station C gets some of the blame, but it propagates the rest of the error backward.
Exactly. The inspector goes to station B, the primer station. They say, well, the chassis from station A was vibrating like crazy and it messed up my primer application. So station B gets some blame and passes the rest back to A.
So by the time the inspector gets back to the start, he has a precise accounting of how much each station contributed to the final error.
A perfect accounting. And then the manager, who is our gradient descent algorithm, comes in and makes adjustments. Station A, which caused the most vibration, gets the biggest fix, the largest weight adjustment. Station B gets a medium fix, and Station C, which was mostly just following bad instructions, gets a tiny fix.
And mathematically, this is all done with calculus.
It's all done using the chain rule from calculus. Backpropagation uses the chain rule to calculate the partial derivative of the error with respect to every single weight in the entire network.
So it calculates the exact answer to the question. If I tweak this specific knob just a little bit, how much will the final score change?
That is the exact question it answers, and the knobs that have the biggest impact on the error are the ones that get turned the most. It's an incredibly elegant and efficient way to assign credit and blame across a massively complex system, and it's what makes training deep networks possible.
Incredible. So those three things, loss, gradient descent, and backpropagation. That's the core loop. That's how the machine learns.
That is the engine room. That cycle, repeated billions of times, is what transforms a random network into an intelligent one.
So now that we have the atom and the engine, let's zoom back out. Let's talk about how these atoms are assembled into bigger structures. The architectures of scale.
Right. Because how you wire these neurons together matters a lot. And that's where the term deep learning comes from. Deep just means there are many layers of these neurons stacked between the input and the output.
Hundreds of layers in modern systems.
Hundreds, even thousands. And before the current generative AI boom, there were a couple of very important specialized architectures that dominated.
The first one was for vision, for images.
Convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, the eye of AI, and their design was inspired directly by the mammalian visual cortex.
How so?
Well, a CNN doesn't look at a whole image at once. That's too much information. Instead, it scans the image with small filters, like a little magnifying glass.
And what are those filters looking for?
In the first layers, they're looking for very simple things. Little diagonal lines, horizontal edges, patches of color, very basic components.
And then it builds up from there.
Exactly. The outputs of that first layer get passed to a second layer, which learns to combine the simple lines into more complex shapes, like circles or corners. Then the next layer combines those shapes to find eyes and noses, and the final layers combine those to recognize a complete face.
It's a hierarchy of complexity.
A perfect hierarchy.
Yeah.
And that structure made them incredibly powerful for any kind of image recognition task.
Okay, so that's vision. What about sequential data, like language or sound?
For that, we had recurrent neural networks, or RNNs. These were the memory of AI.
And how do they work?
They processed information in a loop. When it processed a word in a sentence, it would feed its output back into itself as an input for the next word.
So it had a kind of short-term memory of what came just before.
Exactly. It allowed it to understand some local context. It could figure out that in the phrase riverbank, the word bank means the side of a river, not a financial institution.
But it had a fatal flaw.
A huge one.
Yeah.
It had a terrible memory, a very short attention span. By the time an RNN got to the end of a long paragraph, it had completely forgotten what was said at the beginning.
So it couldn't write a coherent essay or summarize a long document?
Not a chance. The long-range dependencies were just lost.
Yeah.
And overcoming that limitation is what led to the single biggest breakthrough in modern AI history.
The Transformer, 2017.
2017. The paper was titled, "Attention is All You Need." And it was like the invention of the steam engine. It completely changed the game.
And what was the big idea? What did it do differently?
It completely abandoned the RNN's sequential, one-word-at-a-time approach. Instead, it moved to parallel processing.
And it introduced this core mechanism that powers everything now, self-attention.
It's a self-attention mechanism.
Yeah.
And the best way to understand this is the cocktail party effect analogy.
Okay, set the scene.
You're at a loud, crowded party. Dozens of conversations are happening all around you. Your brain does an amazing thing. It tunes all that background noise out and lets you focus on the person you're talking to.
But if someone across the room shouts your name,
your attention snaps to it instantly. You didn't have to listen to every single word in the room sequentially to find your name. Your brain's attention mechanism was monitoring the entire environment in parallel, listening for what was most relevant to you.
and that's what self-attention does for language.
That is exactly what it does. Instead of going word by word, the transformer looks at all the words in a sentence at the same time. And every single word looks at every other single word to calculate a relevant score.
Let's use the classic example to make that concrete.
Okay, the sentence is, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired.
The ambiguity is in the word it. Does it refer to the animal or the street?
For an old RNN, that's a really hard problem.
Mm-hmm.
But for the transformer, it's easy. The attention mechanism calculates the relationships. The word it looks at animal and sees a strong connection. It looks at street and tired and sees a strong connection between those two. It correctly and instantly links it to animal.
And if you change one word in the sentence,
Right. The animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide. Now the attention mechanism instantly recalculates. The connection between it and street becomes very strong, and the link to animal fades.
so it's this ability to understand context across the entire sentence, regardless of distance, that gives it its power.
That's the secret sauce. It's what allows for the long-form coherence and sophisticated reasoning we see in models like GPT-4.
So how does it actually do that mathematically? There's a mechanism with 3 parts, right?
The query, key, and value mechanism, QKV. This is the algorithm that runs the attention calculation.
And we can think of this like a high-tech library filing system.
A perfect analogy. Imagine the sentence is the library. Each word is a book. For the word we're focused on, let's say it needs to figure out its own meaning by gathering information from the other books.
So it sends out a query.
The query, Q is the question. The word it sends out a query vector that essentially asks, I'm a pronoun, I'm looking for the noun I refer to.
And every other word in the sentence has a label on its spine, the key.
The key is the label. The word animal has a key that says, I'm a noun, I'm a subject. The word street has a key that says, I'm a noun, I'm an object.
And inside the book is the actual meaning of the word.
That's the value, V, the actual semantic content.
So what happens next?
The system does a mathematical comparison, a dot product, between the query from it and the key of every other word.
And it's looking for a match.
It's looking for a high compatibility score. The query from it matches the key of animal really well, so that gets a high score. It doesn't match the key of wide very well, so that gets a low score.
And once it finds the high scores,
It then pulls the value, the actual meaning, from the high-scoring words.
Yeah.
It takes the meaning of animal and mixes it into the meaning of it. This process, happening in parallel for every word, is how the model builds up its deep contextual understanding of the entire text.
the scale of this is just hard to comprehend.
It is, and it's worth putting it in perspective. If you compare the number of parameters in a model like GPT-4 to the synapses in a human brain.
How do they stack up?
Well, the human brain has something like 600 trillion synapses. GPT-4 has about 1.8 trillion parameters. So we're still orders of magnitude behind in complexity. And don't even get me started on energy efficiency. The brain runs on about 20 watts.
The power of a dim light bulb.
While a model training run consumes the energy of a small city. But for the last decade, the industry has been driven by one dominant idea.
The scaling hypothesis.
Or the bitter lesson, as it's sometimes called. The lesson is that all our clever architectural tricks matter less than just one thing. Scale. More data, more parameters, more computation. Brute force.
And that has worked. It has consistently delivered better and better models.
It has been the engine of progress from 2012 right up to today.
Okay.
But we are now starting to be at a very hard, very real wall.
The data wall.
The data wall. The problem is simple. We are running out of high-quality human text on the internet to train these models on. We've basically fed them everything, every book, every Wikipedia page, every blog post.
So the era of just passively reading the internet is ending?
It's coming to a rapid close. And that means AI has to fundamentally change how it learns. It has to move from being a reader to being a doer. From simulation to experience.
Which leads us to the frontier of 2025, agents.
Agents and embodied intelligence. This is the next chapter.
So this data wall creates a fundamental problem of grounding, right?
It does. I mean, an LLM trained on the internet is like a person who has read every book about swimming but has never been in a pool.
It can describe the physics of buoyancy perfectly, but it doesn't know what it feels like to be wet.
Exactly. It knows about the world, but it doesn't know the world from direct causal experience. And to get to the next level of intelligence, AI has to get out of the library and into the water. It has to become an agent.
And this also relates back to the hallucination problem, the idea of the LLM as a universal hammer.
Right. It's this powerful probabilistic tool, and you can apply it to anything. But when you apply a probabilistic hammer to a deterministic nail, like a math problem or a legal fact, it can get things catastrophically wrong.
Because its goal is to be plausible, not necessarily to be true.
That's the core of it, which is why the bullshitting high school student analogy is so useful.
The student who has memorized every textbook but can't solve a novel logic puzzle.
Exactly. When you ask it something it hasn't seen the answer to, it doesn't say, I don't know. It pattern matches to the closest thing it has seen and gives you an answer that sounds good, that has the right structure and fluency.
It's bullshitting with confidence.
That's a perfect description of hallucination. It's prioritizing statistical plausibility over factual accuracy.
And there's a setting engineers can use to control this, right? The temperature.
The temperature parameter. It's a randomness dial. You turn the temperature down low, and the model becomes very conservative and factual, always picking the most likely next word.
And if you turn it up,
it gets more creative. It starts taking risks, picking the 5% or 10% likely word. That's where you get poetry and novel ideas, but it's also where you get a much higher risk of it going off the rails and making things up.
So to move beyond this, we need a new framework. One that's about action, not just prediction.
We do. And a leading candidate for that framework is called active inference.
This comes from the neuroscientist Carl Friston. And it's a pretty radical idea, right?
It's complete reframing of intelligence. It stops treating it as an engineering problem of maximizing a reward and starts treating it as a physics problem.
A physics problem of what?
Of minimizing something called variational free energy, which is, for our purposes, a fancy way of saying surprise or prediction error.
So the idea is that any intelligent agent, biological or not, is fundamentally a prediction machine.
It's constantly building an internal model of the world and using it to predict what it's going to sense next. And when reality doesn't match the prediction, that's surprise. The agent hates surprise and will do anything to minimize it.
And it has two ways to do that.
Two fundamental choices. The first is a perception update. You change your mind.
So my internal model predicted I was holding a cup, but my hand feels empty. I was wrong. I'll update my model to say I am not holding a cup.
That's it. That's learning from data. That's what current AIs do. But the second choice is much more interesting. It's action.
You change the world.
You act on the world to make reality match your prediction. My model says I should be holding a cup. My hand feels empty. Therefore, I will move my muscles, grasp that cup, and eliminate the prediction error.
And that is agency.
That is the mathematical definition of agency. It's the proactive drive to make the world conform to your model of it. And this framework is essential for building robots embodied AI that can learn and act in the physical world.
Which brings us to the big shift happening right now. The move from chatbots to agents.
It's the defining shift of this era. The chatbot is a vending machine.
You put in one coin, a prompt, and you get one can of soda and answer. It's purely reactive.
It is. It just sits there and waits for you to push the next button. It can't plan, it can't use tools, it can't pursue a goal over multiple steps.
The AI agent, on the other hand, is a personal chef.
A great analogy. You don't give the chef a series of tiny instructions. You give them a high-level goal. Plan a dinner party for 6 people next Saturday.
And then the chef becomes proactive. It takes over.
It launches an autonomous loop. It starts by planning, breaking the goal into subtasks. It does an inventory check on your pantry. Then it takes action. It connects to the Instacart API to order the missing ingredients. It handles communication. It sends out calendar invites.
And it just keeps working, looping through this cycle of reasoning and action until the goal is achieved.
That's an agent. And we're seeing them everywhere now, especially in coding.
They're going way beyond just auto-completing a line of code.
Oh, miles beyond. You can give a coding agent a high-level goal like refactor this entire application to be more efficient, and it will go and do it. It will write the code, run tests on its own code, find the bugs it created, fix them, and then submit the whole package for a human to review.
It's like a team of tireless super interns.
It is. And it's also leading to this wild new trend called vibe coding. It's where a non-technical person can build real software just by describing the vibe they want in plain English. Make this button have a cool, glassy effect, or the header should feel more modern. The agent translates that vibe into actual code.
And these agents are also getting bodies, the Figure 02 robot.
That viral demo was a watershed moment. Seeing a humanoid robot doing laundry, not from a pre-programmed script, but by seeing, understanding, and adapting its actions in real time.
It was using a vision language action model. It could see the clothes, understand the physics of how fabric slips, and adjust its grip.
That's the key. It's agents moving out of the digital world and into our messy, unstructured physical environments. That's a massive leap forward.
Okay, so with this incredible new capability comes a whole new set of impacts and consequences. We need to talk about the risks and the societal shifts.
Absolutely. Because as these systems get more powerful, the need for them to be reliable and trustworthy becomes non-negotiable.
Which brings us back to the hallucination problem and the need for logic. Neurosymbolic 2.0.
Exactly. For high-stakes fields like medicine or law, you can't have an AI that just bullshits with confidence. You need to marry that statistical intuition with verifiable logical rigor.
So researchers are now trying to build structured knowledge, actual facts, directly into the transformer architecture.
They're integrating things like cognitive architectures, models of how the human brain organizes knowledge, like ACTR, directly into the neural network.
And what does that do?
It gives the AI a kind of cognitive prior, a built-in understanding of how the world works. It allows the system to learn much more efficiently, and crucially, it gives it a truth filter.
A truth filter.
The intuitive neural part system 1 can suggest an answer, but the symbolic logical part system 2 has to check that answer against its database of facts before the AI is allowed to say it out loud. It's an internal fact checker.
That feels like a critical step towards making these things truly useful in professional settings.
It is the critical step for reliability.
Now, on the creative side, we've had this explosion, the video wars of 2025.
A fierce battle. You have OpenAI's Sora 2, which is known for this incredibly cinematic, dreamlike quality.
But it sometimes gets basic physics wrong, right? Like glass not shattering correctly.
It does. Then you have Google's Veo, which is more focused on being a consistent high-resolution tool for creators, and Runway's Gen 3, which gives artists fine-grained control over camera movements and style.
And the output from all of these is getting scarily close to real video.
It's rapidly approaching broadcast quality. The line between reality and synthetic media is blurring to the point of disappearing.
Which has a dark side, the rise of AI slop.
The dark side of democratizing creation. It's this flood of low-quality, mass-produced, often nonsensical content that's designed purely to game social media algorithms and farm for clicks.
The shrimp Jesus phenomenon?
The perfect example. Bizarre, AI-generated images of shrimp fused with religious figures that went viral because they were so absurd that they hacked the attention economy.
And this is feeding something called the zombie internet.
It's a scary concept. It's where AI-generated bots are leaving comments on AI-generated posts, which are then shared by other bots, creating this entirely closed loop of fake synthetic engagement. One study found that something like 20% of videos shown to new YouTube users were identified as this kind of AI slop.
And even with all this progress, we still get these hilarious high-profile failures. The hallucination horror check.
We always need that reality check. Like
Slop.
Google's AI overview confidently telling users that it wasn't the year 2025, or the Taco Bell AI drive-thru having a complete meltdown when someone ordered 18,000 cups of water.
It reminds you that underneath all the fluency, it's still a probabilistic machine that lacks true common sense.
Plausibility is not truth.
So what does this all mean for jobs, for society? The debate is shifting, isn't it?
It is. The threat isn't really AI is going to take your job anymore. It's moved to the centaur model.
Meaning a human working with an AI.
And the new threat is a human using an AI will replace a human who is not using an AI. The person who can effectively collaborate with these tools will be orders of magnitude more productive. We're already seeing data that a coder using an AI agent is about 50% faster.
And Wall Street is catching on to this.
They are. In 2025, we saw a shift where investors started punishing companies that just announced layoffs to cut costs with AI. They started rewarding companies that were using AI to expand what their existing workforce could do to grow the pie instead of just shrinking it.
And we have to talk about the environmental cost of all this. The energy bill is staggering.
It's immense. A single training run for a major model can use the same amount of energy as thousands of homes for a year. The carbon footprint can be equal to the lifetime emissions of 5 cars.
That creates a huge tension with climate goals.
A massive tension. The big high-stakes bet from the AI companies is that eventually AI will become so powerful that it will help us solve the climate crisis, maybe by discovering new materials for solar panels or cracking the code of nuclear fusion. But for now, it's a huge energy drain.
So let's bring this all home. We've talked about how we built this mathematical imitation of a mind. But the loop is now closing, isn't it? We're starting to use this imitation to read the original.
This is, for me, the most profound and startling part of the entire story. We are now using AI to decode the human mind itself.
Through fMRI scans?
Yes, through fMRI data. Researchers are taking the brain activity patterns recorded while someone is, say, listening to a story, and they're feeding those patterns into a transformer model.
And the transformer can make sense of it.
It can, because it's an expert at finding statistical patterns. It learns the mathematical mapping between a certain pattern of blood flow in the brain and a certain language concept.
And so it can reconstruct the story the person was hearing.
It can reconstruct the story or even the thoughts the person is forming with truly eerie accuracy. It's non-invasive mind reading.
It's incredible. It completely validates the whole premise, doesn't it?
It closes the loop perfectly. We use the biology of the brain as inspiration to build mathematical neurons. And now we're using those mathematical neurons to decode the biology of the brain. It suggests that the statistical patterns that define intelligence are universal, whether they're running on wetware or silicon. It's a complex journey, but the core truth remains surprisingly simple. This isn't magic. It's just incredibly sophisticated iterative mathematics. It's the relentless optimization of a giant function against a scorecard.
And it's given us this tool that is both a mirror and a hammer.
I love that framing. It's a mirror that reflects everything about us, our knowledge, our creativity, and unfortunately, our biases. And it's the most powerful hammer ever built, a tool that can reshape every single part of our world.
Which means the big question has changed. It's not, how do we build smarter machines anymore?
We basically solve that. The question now is, how do we remain the architects of the world these machines help us build? How do we ensure they align with human values?
So we'll leave everyone with one final provocative thought to chew on, building on this idea of the data wall.
Right. If AI has read the whole human internet, the only way for it to keep learning is to generate its own new data, synthetic data created by other AIs, or from its own simulated experiences.
So what happens when that becomes the main food source? What happens when AI is learning primarily from other AI?
Will that new intelligence still reflect human reality? Or will it drift off into its own purely self-referential world, a cognitive landscape that's completely alien to the human experience it was first meant to imitate?